At the beginning of every MLB season, there was one moment you can pencil in as a guarantee to be remembered from generation to generation. That is, of course, the final out. It is an image every team who's won a World Series has plastered over their films and media, and one that fans will never forget. The elation, triumph, relief, exhilaration, just every positive emotion flooding your cerebral cortex at once. There's something special about the nature of the final out. Because of how sports with a timer works, which encompasses pretty much every major sport besides baseball, the final play can and mostly is incidental to the game itself. Baseball, on the other hand, one team has to reach 27 outs for the game to end. But not all outs are created equal. Some are objectively more exciting than others. Some are more important than others. Some just carry more weight. So with the World Series on deck, I thought I'd rank the final out of the last 30 seasons and see which ones truly capture its spirit. Of course, because it's one of my videos, I do have some metrics that I'm going to use. I also know that there are some people out there who don't enjoy hearing me go over my methodology. If you are in that group, no worries, we are a results-driven society, it's totally cool, but if you are one of those people, skip to this point in the video to get to your results. First one is win probability added. Believe it or not, most World Series are pretty much won before the final out is made. This means that some, despite technically ending the game, don't really shift it in any meaningful way besides happening to be the final out. I know that this is counterintuitive to the spiel I went on earlier, but these are the facts that we have to deal with in order to determine which ones are truly the best. Basically, a higher win probability added means that the final out was much more consequential to the game itself, and by extension, more riveting. Second, we have championship win probability added. Same logic applies here, but in the broader context of the series. I felt it was important to make the distinction because while an out in a 10-0 laugher may not mean much in terms of WPA, it means a lot more to CWPA in, say, a Game 7 and vice versa. I thought about capturing the number of games played in the series, but felt CWPA would be able to distinguish it with a little more nuance. Third, we have combined wins above replacement between the pitcher and hitter. I mean, come on, ladies, fellas, and everyone in between, we remember the matchups. It's what baseball is all about. I know this doesn't apply to this video, but I couldn't tell you the final score of the 2023 World Baseball Classic Final. I couldn't tell you how many runners were on. What I could tell you is that Mike Trout was at the plate and Shohei Ohtani struck him out to end the game. I decided to go with total career WAR, and not just at the time of the game. I felt it would undermine any player who would go on to have an excellent career. I know this works inverse to disadvantage recent seasons, but if it makes you feel any better, the bottom 4 in this category involve 8 players who have been retired for quite a while. Greatness has a way of transcending the limits of time in that way. Next, we have years since the winning team's last World Series title. This is a big one in my opinion. The longer a franchise's World Series drought, the more meaningful the final out is. Having a sanctioned champion crowned every season for so long works towards baseball's favor, as it means the heartbreak and misery have spanned generations, but it also means the sigh of relief blows stronger. This last metric is going to be controversial. It's the vibe check. Look, this is an inherently emotional ranking, and numbers can only do so much to sum up the intensity of winning it all. So I feel it's appropriate to introduce the first totally subjective metric in NMF history. With it, I wanted to round up everything not captured within the other numbers. I'm looking at outside storylines, whether it be baseball related or even world events. Did the team win it at home because hey, we can all agree it's a lot more exciting winning on your home turf than in front of a despondent crowd? Was it a difficult play, a nasty pitch, a storied franchise, an underdog, hell, even a unique or memorable celebration? Just anything that won't show up in the other numbers. Now, it is a 1 to 10 scale, but I was super conservative with it, and so the highest one only scored at an 8.5. Just keep that in mind. As always, I weight these according to importance. If you disagree, well, you can play at home using your own weights. I then ranked each metric and tallied up the final sum to get our results. Again, this is not the most scientific of methods, but if you want to use this list to win a drunken argument with your friends, say during a trivia night at Mellow Mushroom, then go right ahead. Before we start, a quick word from our sponsor, and this one you don't want to miss. As a touring musician slash baseball YouTuber, I have to be versatile. I enjoy adventure. I enjoy taking risk. I also enjoy comfort. So I need a shoe that fits my lifestyle. That's why I chose today's sponsor, Vessi. Normally I'd have to buy a shoe for every occasion, whether that be for playing the drums, morning hikes, farmers markets, you name it. But now with Vessi's title sneakers, I have a pair of shoes that fits every one of those needs. Now, I don't have to worry about packing 3 different types of shoes every time I go on the road. These shoes are durable too. You can splash around in the mud without having to worry about damaging the soles or getting your socks wet, and if you go to festivals or even like to frolic around in the grass at 9 in the morning, you know how important that is. They're also extremely comfortable. Walking in them feels like bouncing around in a cloud. Plus, they're stylish. These shoes will blend in both at the gym and on a Friday night in the city. Vessi isn't just a shoe company. It's a lifestyle choice that embodies versatility, confidence, and innovation. So what are you waiting for? If you follow the link in the description, or just go to the pinned comment, or scan the QR code that's appearing on the screen right now, you will get 15% off your first Vessi order upon checkout. Thank you so much to Vessi for sponsoring, and I love these shoes. I mean, what else is there to say? I love these shoes. Back to the video. I kind of figured a Yankees win would rank dead last, but if you really want to know, it was a 1,000th away from 29, so you can think of this as a virtual tie for the bottom spot. The novelty of winning in 96 had worn off, and this just felt like business as usual. The real excitement on the defensive end occurred in the 8th inning as the Padres left the bases loaded to end what could have been the franchise's only 2nd win in World Series history. Just nothing really special about this one, besides the fact that it's the first of Mariano Rivera's 5 appearances on this list. As a Braves fan, this one hurts. Even though it was a Game 6, the Braves had opened the game up in the 5th, so the last 4 innings were basically the closest you'd see to running out the clock. Yuli Gurriel and Will Smith might both be on the Hall of Fame ballot, but will be one and dones at best. I did maybe give a higher than deserved vibe check considering they didn't win at home, but it really comes down to Dansby Swanson looking towards second before making the completely emotional decision to throw the ball to Freddie Freeman, knowing this could be his last game in a Braves uniform. That was a pretty cool moment. This one might surprise some folks, but in the grand scheme, the Royals' 30-year World Series drought wasn't that long compared to some others. The game was pretty much out of reach to the point where defensive indifference was the reason the Mets even had a runner in scoring position. And for the vibe check, I don't know, everything seemed off. A small market team winning in the Big Apple should feel grand, but it just didn't this time. The game had very Sunday night vibes, which makes sense because it was played on a Sunday night. Something about a strikeout looking to end the season feels off to me as well, especially when the pitch wasn't actually a strike. Hopefully Wilmer Flores' season never ends on a wrong call again. Moving on.
Oh, he did! And the game ends! A swinging strike 3! No.
Yankees fans, I'm so sorry, but trust me, you will get some favorable rankings. This is just what happens when you win so many gosh darn World Series. But yeah, a simple flyout with the bases empty to retire someone with 6 career WAR just isn't going to move the needle. It did happen at home, so it does get additional vibe points. But besides that, it's basically a carbon copy of 98. Just like with 2021, even though it was a Game 6, it pretty much felt like a sleepwalk getting to this point, with the Astros' lockdown bullpen retiring 12 of the last 13 Phillies hitters in order. I did give this one a pretty good vibe check rating on the basis that it was Dusty Baker's first World Series title, and he was brought in specifically to re-legitimize the Astros franchise after the sign-stealing scandal broke in 2019. I actually believe I could have gone a bit higher with the vibe check, just because Minute Maid Park has one of the best October atmospheres, but ranking 10th in that department feels fair to me. Fitting what many would consider to be the worst World Series in recent memory's final out also being in an unremarkable spot. The magic from 04 had worn off, and really something about this final out always felt cold to me. And this is coming from someone who watched it live with his grandma, who was Boston born and raised. Nothing really special about this one. Also, can anyone tell me what the Rockies mascot was doing here? Religious viewers of this series will note that this is the first time I have ever included 2020 in my rankings. It finally gets a spot at the big kids table, and it still ranks towards the bottom. Now this is one that I believe can rank higher, with Willy Adamas making a case as one of the game's best shortstops right now. But again, there's a sizable gap between this and number 23. Vibe check was difficult because people are going to call bias, and you are very right to. Vibes were weird. The Dodgers won what would have been a home game in another team's ballpark whose own fans had yet to see them play there to conclude a 60-game season nobody really felt 100% comfortable playing. The Dodgers' longest tenured position player was pulled in the previous inning because he tested positive for COVID. I'm sorry, man, vibes were very off. And it's not like anything else was pulling it out of the gutter. Honestly surprised it ranked this high. So this is where my vibe check probably needs to be put into check. I'm looking at just the final out here, folks, but I gave this one a generous vibe check as a tip of the cap to a top 10 World Series. And again, good celebration in front of the home crowd, but don't get your jimmies in a twist. This is still towards the bottom, as again, this series felt over by the 6th inning, hence why the CWPA looks unusually low for a Game 7. Great series, ended kind of on a whimper. This one would have gotten lost in the back end had it not been for this technically being the first World Series title in Expo/Nationals history. And yes, I am combining them even if the franchise moved cities or changed their name. I also gave a higher vibe check just because Jan Gomes and Daniel Hudson did a fantastic job with the synchronized equipment toss. And let's not forget, no offense to the rest of Willy Adamas' career, Seth Smith, Nick Castellanos, Keith Lockhart, Wilmer Flores, Yuli Gurriel, and Mark Sweeney, but Michael Brantley is the first hitter on this list who's going to get a Hall of Fame vote or two. Again, we are ranking just the final out here. 2011 was the much better series, but 2012 technically had the better final out, according to the numbers that I feel are important. What really carries this one is the fact that it was future Hall of Famer and that season's Triple Crown winner, Miguel Cabrera, on the wrong side of history here. Without a doubt, the best hitter to appear on this list. And hey, you know what? This was a close game that ended in extras. Only problem is that it was the 4th game in a sweep. What's funny about this entry is that the first baseball YouTube script I ever wrote was trying to rank every droughtbuster of the 21st century. Basically every team that had not won a World Series in their last 50 plus years of existence. Obviously the 2017 Astros were on it and ranked surprisingly high. I essentially spent 3 paragraphs justifying their placement. Luckily, I don't have to do that here. Because it was their first World Series title, they rank extremely high in that category. But I know you're wondering why the vibe check is also very high. What many of us forget is that the city of Houston experienced a devastating hurricane in August of that year. Winning it this season meant a lot to their hometown, and I felt that deserved some recognition. So the last 5 World Series ranking in the bottom half of this list bums me out. But hopefully it means that we are in store for some crazy finales for the rest of the decade. Like when the 87-win Tigers take out the 84-win Nationals with the bases loaded to end Game 7 of the 2026 World Series. But in all actuality, the metric carrying this one is the fact that this was a title 63 years in the making. The only factor pushing the vibe check higher than say 2007 is that the Rangers have had an especially rocky path to get here. Please check out Sportstorm's video on their franchise if you want to learn more. Yeah, another widely considered middling World Series. This one gets points in the WPA/CWPA departments because while it was only a Game 5, the tying run was on first to end it. A young Adam Wainwright closing out both the NLCS and World Series that year will never not be amusing to me. Dude's a national treasure, and this was a positive omen for such an illustrious career. I find it fitting that the generally agreed upon ranking for each Giants World Series in terms of quality is also the same for the final out. As we've seen with 2011, a good World Series doesn't necessarily mean a highly satisfying ending. But those damn Giants are always doing everything by the book. The reason this rates decently in the vibe check, despite the Giants winning on the road, which just made me realize that they've yet to win a World Series in Oracle Park, and that makes me genuinely sad, is because I personally love Brian Wilson still rattling off his usual celebration before getting mobbed by his teammates. You can't say that doesn't put a smile on your face. So we're past the point of shuffling around World Series that ended on a relative low note. You know what's crazy to think about? The Phillies only had to wait 2 more years than the 2021 Braves between World Series titles, and yet it seems like they waited an eternity longer. Maybe it's because the Braves filled the gap with dominant teams sandwiched between a few dud seasons, while the Phillies filled theirs with duds sandwiched between a few decent seasons here and there. Maybe it's because we perceive the 90s as being closer to the 2020s than the 80s being to the 2000s. But yeah, this was a good final out. I enjoy Brad Lidge falling to his knees because the typical response from the pitcher is to get as far away from the ground as possible before getting dogpiled. The only real number holding this back is combined wins above replacement. Brad Lidge was unable to recapture his peak as a consistently dominant reliever after this season. And even though he's an immaculate grid darling, there's a reason Eric Hinske was the pinch hitter thrown in to fall on the sword. Okay, even though I wasn't even born yet, I'm glad we at least get this one. Hopefully that fact dispels any personal biases for the vibe check. Just to be safe, let's quickly run down why it's so high. First, they were the home team. 2. First World Series win in Atlanta, which technically years since last win doesn't account for. 3. Running play on a deepish fly ball. 4. Good call by Bob Costas, even if it didn't age super well.
The team of the 90s has its world championship.
Again, I'm trying to look at everything here, and it's not like Vibe Check was the only difference maker. It was a close Game 6, hence the top 10 CWPA. Just a good final out. Yankees fans who were mad about 98 and 99, I told you to be patient. You have a final out in the good category with 2 more on the way. I probably ran the vibe check a bit too low, and I'll let you get on me for that one. I know they won it at home, but there was a generally off-putting feeling from seeing the Yankees come off a free agent spending spree and immediately reel off another title with their aging core. Yankees fans, I know it's easy to come off sentimental knowing it was their last World Series title together, but I have to weigh your feelings with the feelings of everyone else at the time. And a lot of them kinda saw it as the evil empire running baseball for another few years. None of us knew at the time what would happen afterwards. So I was being literal. I wanted to rank the final out of every season. Walk-offs don't count here. As you'll see though, this isn't going to necessarily be a detriment to most games you're thinking of. This also raises the question, do I use the final out recorded by the winning team or just the final out period? I decided to go with the latter, just because if I'm being literal, might as well make no exceptions. But I am still using years since the last winning team's World Series title, and not the other way around. Make sense? Cool. This is the one that suffers the most from that distinction, but for good reason. Devon White's flyout was more of a deflating feeling for the home crowd in Toronto, hence the not super crazy high vibe check. Honestly, I was surprised the most that combined WAR was so low, because Devon White is one of the most underrated players of his time. But wow, did Mitch Williams fall off the face of the earth after this? Overall, it was what happened after this out that created what is arguably the greatest ending to a season ever. Lest we not forget that the 2004 World Series was kinda mid on the surface. Luckily, we still get to appreciate what a long time coming this piece of metal in particular was. Sure, the raw, cold numbers sees a largely inconsequential out in a lopsided series. But 86 years, man, for such a storied franchise. This wasn't, wow, what a dud series, television numbers are down. This was, the curse of the Bambino has finally been lifted. Look, young players watching, all I'm saying is, say something foreboding about the shitty team that traded you, and there's a chance they're mentioning your name in 86 years. Fitting these ones are right next to each other. I mean, 2004 wouldn't have been so especially sweet if it wasn't for this year, and the unimaginable heartbreak that came from Game 7 of the ALCS. So then why is the vibe check for this one much higher? Because remember, the Red Sox drought was already tied into years since last World Series title. That number was riding solely on the franchise in question. Marlins don't get that benefit in theirs, but it still doesn't explain how bizarrely satisfying it was seeing them take down the big bad Yankees on their home turf. And we like to appreciate a little bit of trolling over here. It also lets me daydream the possibility that the Cubs and Red Sox could have met each other in the World Series that year for a matchup every sports writer was dreaming of. It would not have been worth it to lose that all-time World Series meeting if the Yankees trampled over the Marlins. And I mean, Josh Beckett getting Jorge Posada to roll out to him to put the final touches on a 9-deep performance against them. I know I didn't want to create many exceptions, but this one works on its own logic. This was a very sardonic final out, and I love it for that reason. And we start the top 10 with a crazy good ending to a crazy good series. Let's not forget, should-be Hall of Famer Kenny Lofton was the final out of a 7-game World Series while being the potential tying run if only he could get on. This one could have been higher, especially on vibes, but I felt like the craziness of the situation was summed up by everything else presented, and we're at a point where every final out has something distinct about it. Yes, the first Yankees World Series in what must have felt like forever, but hey, it was also an end to an exciting game in an exciting series. Normally a pop-up in foul territory would diminish the vibes rating, but Charlie Hayes' reaction is so priceless that it cancels it out. And as we'll see, this isn't the first time the third baseman's reaction really sells the final out. Only things holding it back is that it was John Wetland ending it against Mark Lemke. And in the grand scheme, it's not like the Yankees were that far removed from their former glory days, but there is indeed another. Yes, the Red Sox, who at this point were averaging 2 World Series wins per decade for the last 20 years, closed out a largely dead Dodgers team to the quiet hums of Dodger Stadium. But Chris Sale versus Manny Machado, I mean, what a fucking way to end it. First off, 2 potential Hall of Famers. Think about that for a second. This is something we are saying in 2024, and it wasn't even a lock then. These were 2 great players of the time who are still doing great things to this day. It is very likely they overtake the number 1 spot, which we'll get to in a second. Plus, if you've watched my revenge video, you will know this was one of the greatest acts of revenge in MLB history, which makes this matchup all the better, hence the favorable vibes rating. And the Red Sox magic ends here. Hey, Red Sox fans, you got 2 top 10 finishes, and that's gotta be worth something. And really, this would not be so high in the rankings if not for the vibe check. So let me explain. The Red Sox won 2 World Series in the last 10 years. Yes, but they haven't won it at home. A home that happened to be Fenway Park, the oldest active professional sports venue in America, in a city that happened to be reeling from a devastating terrorist attack that occurred in that very same year. And it was with a team that happened to finish last in their division the previous season. If those aren't the best vibes, then I don't know what they are. The most shamelessly forgotten World Series winner. You know, fun fact, the White Sox drought was 2 years longer than the Red Sox. Look, controversial take here, the curse of the Black Sox is objectively better than the curse of the Bambino. And Vibe Check loves curses. It especially loves curses that tie into something buried really deep in the more insidious sides of baseball history. Not just ones based upon lopsided trades that were used to fund musicals. Plus, that was a tough play in a close game, hence why WPA also liked it. Also, call me biased, but I really do think the 2005 White Sox need more attention. Will them being number 6 on the greatest final out in the last 30 years give them the recognition they need? Probably not, but seriously, look this team up. Their story flies under the radar so many times, and that needs to change. I'm sorry, Royals fans. This one might act as the greatest heartbreak more than it really acts as number 5 on this list. What's really keeping it down is the fact that, yeah, the Giants winning the World Series had basically become a biannual tradition to this point. But there's something about this out completing the greatest Game 7 relief appearance in MLB history in what was one of the greatest runs a pitcher has ever gone on in October. That's pretty f***ing cool. Plus, obvious bias here, but Pablo fucking Sandoval, man. I mean, what a way to sell an easy catch. And the greatest Yankees finish comes at number 4 with their win at the turn of the millennium. Not much to say here besides this being 2 Hall of Famers going toe-to-toe to end the first and only Subway World Series. Well, the first Subway Series since the Dodgers and Giants moved westward. But we have the top 3 coming up, and I'm very anxious to get to them. Before we do, I normally don't get an opportunity to ask in my other videos. So please, if you've enjoyed this, and if you've made it this far, I'm willing to bet you have, like the video and subscribe to the channel. I promise you won't regret it. Oh yeah, here we go. I told you being literal wouldn't hurt these years too much. The final out of the 1997 season was a play at home plate. I do not have the time or patience to go back and see if this ever happened before, but from what I remember, it hasn't. This was also the most consequential out of the entire series, which you cannot say about 1993. Speaking of 93, viewers with a keen eye will notice this is Devon White's second appearance on this list. That's right, Devon White was the final out of 2 World Series in which his team won. The first, and let's be honest, this is never going to happen again, only player to have accomplished this, I guess you could call a feat. I swear, this guy is the Wilmer McLean of baseball. Also, just want to point out, vibe check is high because it was made by Gold Glover Tony Fernandez, who 2 plays earlier booted a grounder to let the winning run move to third with less than 2 out. A runner he did everything in his power to make sure did not score to end the game. That's a pretty instantly gratifying redemption story. The greatest game ever played was on a Wednesday night in Cleveland. And yes, a great game deserves a great ending. I'm not going to say too much about this one, besides the fact that it maybe unfairly loses points on war total because both teams had already unloaded their benches and pens to get to this point. But the rest speaks for itself, so I'll just say this. Go Cubs go. Because that leaves us with number 1. We want to talk about redemption stories. How about the damn pitcher of the game recovering from an overthrow to second, trying to field a bunt by launching a dart to third in order to keep the tying run at second? The Yankees were 2 outs away, and with 2 weak lefties, it pretty much seemed to be in the bag at this point. Obviously, the scar of 9/11 was felt all over this series, and I had to incorporate that into the vibe check. But who knew that a forced play at third for the first out of the inning would be the greatest final out of the last 30 years. If I was less clever, I'd just say, well, that's baseball for you. But I am more clever than that, so I'll say, and that's baseball. Shout out my friend who's a Yankees fan. I wrote and recorded the script before the regular season ended, so hoping your team is in the World Series because that would be pretty cool. Same goes for you, Zach. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. I will see you next time.